Obamacare. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Stupid people are ruining America.
The president just wants to take care of you. He just doesn't think you're able to do it for yourself.
There's a very thin line between communism, progressivism, Marxism, socialism.
The empire will strike back.
You still don't know that this was political.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of America Our Way. I am your host, Dustin Hoyt. I want to start off by talking about something Rush Limbaugh did on Wednesday morning. It has irked me, and it's something he's been talking about. It's this, has to do with the Nigerian girls and the hashtag diplomacy, and he has just been all over the place, and this story has somewhat kind of evolved with what he's put in with it, but I'm going to start at the top. With the Nigerian girls scandal, the schoolgirls that were taken by the Boko Haram radical Islamist militants in Nigeria, they had all these schoolgirls that were kidnapped, and they're converting them to Islam and trying to take away their education. Supposedly Boko Haram translates to no education or no Western education or something. And they're talking about marrying these girls off to Islamists or selling them or stuff like that. And there's been this hashtag diplomacy thing that people are talking about. And a lot of people on the right are coming up with a lot of grief in terms of, you know, how the White House and the administration is handling this. Now, you've got the Warhawks coming out saying that it's, you know, a travesty that you've got these girls kidnapped and all the White House is willing to do is send out hashtags. They sent a few people over to help with the situation, to assist Nigeria and other coalition forces that are advising that kind of thing. And, you know, it's a horrible situation, and it seems to me that a lot of people don't understand hashtags, they don't understand social media, and they don't understand what the White House is trying to do. And it's disheartening for a number of levels because it shows a few problems. One, it shows that a lot of people don't seem to understand the intention of the hashtag. They don't seem to understand the point of it. In a world where more people are concerned with checking Twitter and Facebook than they are with keeping up with the news, hashtag diplomacy is not about actual diplomacy directly. The diplomacy effect of this hashtag campaign is secondary. It's not the main effect. Like, you're not going to get a hashtag to change things with Boko Haram. Obviously, the militant Islamists are not checking Twitter, and they don't really care about pictures the First Lady sent out. And people that are making these claims that it's a do-nothing White House and the best they can do is hashtags, and they're making these claims about weak diplomacy, they don't understand what's going on. And I'd just like to clarify that, first of all. Now, I know a lot of people might take offense saying I'm defending the administration, but whatever. That's not what I'm doing. Just listen, hear me out. The idea was that they could spread awareness and they could get more people involved in the story with the hashtag diplomacy. Because more often than not, when atrocities happen in Africa, nobody cares. Nobody knows about it, nobody hears about it, it doesn't make the news, and the world in general doesn't hear about it. I mean, I can't tell you, as somebody with a lot of international friends, how often I see Muslims complaining when an atrocity happens to a large group of Muslims. There is not an outrage for it. I mean, when you see a bunch of people killed in a third world country, it often misses the radar in the Western media. So the idea was that more people would care if they brought it to social media, and that's happened. You know, even local TV stations are running the Nigerian girl story. It's one of the top stories in American news, and it's largely because of the hashtag. Most people wouldn't have heard about it if not for that, or cared about it, because generally speaking, Americans don't care about foreign policy unless it's Russia, and that's because there's so many people that remember the Cold War. So for people that are dismissing the hashtag altogether, You don't understand. They're not trying to get Nigeria directly to change with a hashtag. Obama's not saying, I'm going to deploy a hashtag and it's going to make them suffer until they do something. It's indirectly what they're doing. What they've done is gotten a lot of the population of the world, instead of just world leaders, to be pressured into doing something. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. Getting voters involved in something when we live in a democratic country is not something to shirk at. Anything that gets people informed on an issue is good. And this isn't something that is divisive. I mean, these little girls were kidnapped, forced to convert to Islam, and they might be sold off into slave marriages. So, to be clear, the hashtag in and of itself is not bad. Now, where it becomes an issue is when you've got people like Rush Limbaugh railing against it as weak and ineffective. But in reality, Rush Limbaugh doesn't even know what a hashtag is. He says it's a Twitter handle and doesn't understand the concept. So when you're getting your social media politic advice from someone who probably doesn't really understand how to use social media, you've already done goofed a little bit. But Rush went further and put his foot in his mouth, and he does that from time to time, and he's human, so I mean, I like Rush for the most part. It's just he does this from time to time. Now, the thing that really is irksome about this story is that Boko Haram is on the State Department's radar under Hillary Clinton, and allegedly Hillary Clinton pushed to not classify the group as a terror group when she was in office, and she also allegedly advised the White House, or excuse me, the State Department advised the Nigerian government to engage with the Muslim minority population in that country, in Nigeria. And so you've got this whole narrative that's being sort of missed in terms of politics, that Hillary may have messed up pretty big with this one. She may have dropped the ball. And that, requires more investigation before you can really make that claim effectively. And I'm all for that. Making the argument that the White House screwed up reaching out and declaring this group a terror group is a whole nother argument. But when we look at the hashtag itself, when we look at that, it's not an ineffective tool because it did get people involved. And I really am hoping that some national news outlet, and it looks like Fox News is trying to take the spearhead on this one, looks into the fact that Hillary did not declare Boko Haram a terror group and even pushed to not have them. But Rush took it a step further and tried to connect the dots, saying that Hillary Clinton in the State Department tried to get Nigeria to reach out to Boko Haram, to the Muslim population in Nigeria, and I am not making this up. Wednesday morning, between 1 and 2 o'clock, Wednesday afternoon between 1 and 2 o'clock, he said that he thought the Nigerian government implementing the anti-gay law was the byproduct of Hillary Clinton urging Nigeria to reach out to the Muslim population. He was trying to say that the Clinton State Department basically encouraged the anti-gay law in Nigeria as a way to reach out to Muslims. And this claim is just so beyond insane. When I heard it today, I couldn't believe it. I mean, the idea that Hillary Clinton, who we all know is going to win the Democrat nomination in 2016, would encourage a country to enact an anti-gay law to reach out to a Muslim population is crazy. And the idea that the Nigerian government did that to reach out to Muslims is equally crazy. This law was put into place by a largely Christian fundamentalist nation. A lot of people don't know this, but Nigeria is a Christian nation. They are majority Christian, very fundamentalist that way, and it's, the byproduct of missionaries heading out there. And so this law is in effect like an American blue law. It's put into place by religious people who think that being gay, homosexuality is a sin. I know a lot of Americans feel that way, but you would never dream of passing a law that calls gay people criminals. But at the same time, if you spend any time on social media, you see a lot of right-wingers coming out and saying that, being gay, like the anti-gay laws in Russia, is a good thing because it prevents gays from promoting their lifestyle to children or something. And the whole notion is just mind-boggling. When you look at why this country implemented the law, it has nothing to do with Islam and everything to do with a misled Christian belief. Now, I know a lot of people will argue that it's not Christian, and rightfully so, because it's judgmental and it leads to oppression of people, and that in the Bible it doesn't say anything about oppressing people like this. And, I mean, throwing people in jail for being gay, could you imagine doing that here in America? I know there are a lot of homophobic people here in our country still that would be okay with that, but in reality, if we take a look at this law, it's not very Christian, but it is it is just an oppressive fascist law that was put into place, an oppressive law by fundamentalist Christians who are trying to address homosexuality in the wrong way. And to try and connect that to Hillary Clinton is just insane. And I could not believe that he did that today. So let's make it very clear that as rotten as Hillary Clinton is, and you're never going to hear me defend her as a politician, this Nigerian law on gays had nothing to do with her, had nothing to do with Muslim outreach. And trying to connect her idea or her State Department's policy of trying to get the Nigerian government to reach out to the Muslim population had little to nothing to do with the gay law. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that. I mean, you can't look at the Democrat Party, as oppressive as they are, and say that they would put out an anti-gay law. I mean, you have openly gay people in the Democrat Party running for office. Clay Aiken comes to mind in North Carolina. And you have them removing people from office for saying homosexual, or removing people from businesses, like HGTV canceling that show from the two Christians that said homosexuality is a sin. And that's just the way it is now with liberals. So the idea that Hillary Clinton would put that forward is ridiculous. That law in Nigeria goes against everything we believe as Americans in terms of being free to live your life as you see fit. And the freedom, people are free to condemn you for whatever. And in America, we condemn people for a lot of things. But we don't pass laws like this in America. I mean, we pass some pretty crazy laws, but thankfully we're not to the point to where we persecute everyone based on lifestyle choices. Now, we do take out laws against polygamy because there are religions and cult that seem to perpetuate and push women into child marriages and even brainwash people, and we've seen that in the Texas case and in Utah, where polygamist compounds have tried to educate their own and then have led to brainwashing them into believing they needed to have 10 wives and 27 children and stuff like that based on religion. And we put people in jail for believing in polygamy, and we don't allow people to marry into multiple partner marriages. And for those of you who listen to my show, you know that I don't believe government should be in marriage, and if you want to marry two people, go for it. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. Marriage, as far as the government is concerned, is a contract. Now, if you want to take it up with God, whole different matter. But in terms of what we do as law, this practice in our country, I don't think we should have any place in marriage and lifestyle choices like that. There's no science backing a great number of things like that. But polyamorous relationships, multiple people, we don't have anything that says it's harmful except in the instances of cults. We'll have more when we come back.
Hey, this is Alfonso Rachel with 20 Pound Sledge and PJTV Zone Nation, and you're listening to VLR.
On this Rush Limbaugh thing with the Nigerian girls, we've got Jon Stewart, who came out and said, it's tried to start this hashtag F Rush Limbaugh because of what he was saying against the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls thing that Michelle Obama did. And I'd just like to reiterate, Jon Stewart and his take on this whole hashtag thing, I would argue he probably has a greater grasp of social media than Rush Limbaugh, but the way that he handled it was completely out of line. I mean, saying F Rush Limbaugh in the hashtags and saying that he's against, the little girl from Pakistan that was killed, or that was an assassination attempt against her. The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. To try and compare the two and say that Rush Limbaugh's against this, heroic little girl because of his railing against the hashtag is to not understand the issue. And I just want to inform you guys, because I know that, he's making headlines and so is the hashtag. And let's just be clear. Rush Limbaugh does not understand social media. He's an old school guy. He barely is even checking his own emails. And I know a lot of you who listen are like that. You're not real big on the computers. And some of you are, but some of you aren't. And I know a lot of my older listeners, middle-aged and up, y'all are not big on social media, on Twitter and hashtags and Facebook and all that stuff. And that's fine. But to try and come out and have opinions on what's being done with social media when you don't understand it is in and of itself kind of ridiculous. And unfortunately, you've got Jon Stewart, who's not even bothering to address the issue at hand, which is the fact that Rush Limbaugh is just confused and doesn't understand what the White House is trying to do by getting worldwide pressure against the Nigerian government through Twitter, which it did, and is probably the only reason that anything's being done about these Nigerian girls. So let's be fair on the issue, and I don't think Jon Stewart was fair. He came out and put Malala out there and made her a dummy for this attack against Rush, and I thought that was in poor taste. He's a comedian, and he will claim, I'm just making jokes, and you can't take me seriously, and that's irresponsible on his part, and he has more of an effect than he thinks he does, but you guys are more educated than that. You listeners are more educated, so we're gonna stay that way and just call it for what it is. He did a poor job of attacking him. If you're gonna attack him for the right reasons. Attack him for what he said about Hillary and the connection to the anti-gay laws, and attack him for not understanding how social media works. And feel free to start a hashtag like Make Rush Understand or Teach Rush Twitter. Fine. But to say F you Rush because of what he said, his ignorant opinion, I mean, I know ignorant has a bad connotation, but that's what it means when you don't understand something. Ignorance is when you don't understand something, and that's what Rush Limbaugh did. So if you want to attack him for that, fair game. But to try and come out and say he's against Malala is ridiculous. Speaking of social media, there is something that is making the rounds here that I'm going to address. There was a monologue on Louis C.K.'s show. For those of you who don't know Louis C.K., he is a left-leaning guy, as most people are in the entertainment industry. You could argue he's more libertarian than he is Democrat. You could argue he's a blatant flaming liberal. You could go either way with him, and I don't really care to do that. But there was a scene where this Sarah Baker, an actress, did a 7-minute monologue about being a fat girl and just how horrible it is to be a fat girl, and it's hard to date being fat, and guys don't chase after you. It's just not in the cards. Blah 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 blah. I'm not going to read you the monologue, not to belittle what she said. I'll do that later. But, well, not really belittle her, but there was an article written about it by a plus-size model, one Jennifer Maitland, over at the Daily Beast. For those of you who know me personally, you know that I'm very into fitness and nutrition, and for those that know me really well, I've struggled with my weight over the years, ranging from incredibly sexy to chubby and even fat. As a kid, I was really, really fat. As a teenager, I went from fat to hot to fat again, and as an adult, I've been hot, I've been fat, I've been hot. It goes back and forth, and a lot of it stems from misinformation about nutrition and exercise that circulates out there in the world today, and I was a victim of it just like 90% of the population. I now am happy to note that I am sufficiently well-versed in nutrition and exercise science that is not an issue anymore. And this whole notion of fat girls and the word fat being bad, or embracing the word fat, or confidence is sexy no matter what your size, let's just put all of that to rest. When you start talking about what's attractive and what's not, you're arguing subjective values. Now, subjective values basically means opinion, and we all know what that boils down to.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
And that's the truth of it. When it comes down to what you like in a partner, whether that be male or female or whatever, it's subjective. I mean, you could have two guys who like fit girls, and they will find some girls beautiful and some girls not, based just on appearance. And the same thing with women. There's just certain features we like in the opposite sex. Now, when it comes down to bigger women, a lot of guys like that. A lot of guys like bigger women. I mean, there's a whole sect of people that like BBWs. They like big old girls. The bigger the better. And a lot of people don't. And that's just the way it is. And to try and combat that, I mean, you're welcome to. And to try and claim that it's something to do with the media and Hollywood and models and magazines and stuff like that, you can make those arguments too. I would disagree that most of it has to do with the media because, for instance, there's a picture out there that's circulating. It's like, when did this become hotter than this? It shows a bunch of really, really skinny girls like Keira Knightley up against girls like Marilyn Monroe. And when you post something like that, most guys see the Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor types, the girls with some curves, and they like that better than the Keira Knightley stick-thin supermodel types. There is a reason Kate Upton is one of, if not the most popular supermodel in the world right now. She's got curves. She's not a big girl, but she's got curves. And a lot of people say she's fat. A lot of people say she's chubby, and that's nonsense. But the point is, it's this thicker girl, and guys love it. I mean, I have my own preferences. I don't like a girl that's got, too much meat on her bones. I don't like a girl that's out of shape. And that's more to do with the fact that I spend a lot of time in the gym, and I've had problems in the past personally with girls that don't appreciate all the time I spend in the gym or all of the dietary restrictions I give myself to keep my physique attractive. And that, generally speaking, for me, has more to do with what I prefer than anything else. And to say that it's this whole fat stigma and it's just that people talk down about fat girls and that's why they don't like them, that's usually not the case. It's usually just because, they just don't find it appealing. And it's not because of the media, it's because, generally speaking, it's just not an attractive trait. That being said, there's still people that enjoy it. There's still people that like bigger girls. And there's a lot of guys, as they get older, could care less about appearance and more about content of character. And again, it just is a personal preference thing. And having this whole argument about, feminism gets involved and fat shaming and all kinds of stuff is kind of ridiculous, especially when you get into this whole, and this is where the article and I have a problem. She's like, if you're a bigger girl and you strut your stuff and you own it, everybody will find that attractive. It's just not true. I don't care how confident you are. If you're too big for me, you're too big for me. And for a lot of guys, that holds true. Now, don't get me wrong, there is something incredibly unattractive about a girl that constantly needs reassurance about her looks, but that's a mental thing and not a physical thing. I mean, there's guys that are in perfect shape, with under 10% body fat that are, oh, my chest isn't big enough, oh, my calves are too small, and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's the way the world works. Body image is a personal thing, and the people who appreciate the way your body looks is subjective. Some are going to like it, some aren't. It's an opinion conversation. And when it starts coming to what people's opinions are, it's not the same argument as this fat shaming argument as, all women are beautiful, blah, blah, blah. It's not the same thing. And I know a lot of people will talk about, like, going to Africa, they find fat people more attractive, and it's because fat people are considered to be wealthy enough to be fat people, and so that becomes more attractive. And then you've got, just in black culture in general, they prefer bigger girls, and most of the time, it's not a general. It's a generalization. It's the rule, not the exception. But when you're looking at this and you're trying to tell people that, being fat is sexy if you're confident, it's not the case if that's not what a person finds attractive. And you can't be offended by that. If you want to get offended by a person's opinion on something, you need to look deeper than what their feelings are on adipose tissue, on how many fat cells you have. It's kind of an asinine conversation, because it's like, oh, let's change what people find superficially attractive, rather than trying to change the conversation to why do people look at the outside when deciding who they're going to have a relationship with or what's attractive there. And, this is something where I agree with the article. It's like, some guys like it, some don't, but you can't get mad when people don't appreciate your curves, is what the woman said in the article, what Miss Maitland said here, and that's, I think, exactly correct. And she's here. I'll quote the article here. She goes, "At the end of the day, it is a purely descriptive term and has nothing to do with the person that you really are. Whether we are fat, skinny, tall, short, blonde, or brunette should not define us as women." And that's exactly right. And we most certainly should never feel ashamed of them, especially when it comes to dating. Now, I have some issues there, because as a health nut myself, if you are overweight, I am concerned for your health, and I am concerned with what you do with your time. But that is my personal preference. I think, especially as an advanced society, that we all have an obligation to our bodies, our health, and our families to be in good shape. I think that with modern technology and with the wealth levels we have in our country, we have this amazing ability to go spend time at the gym and eat healthy and not be fat. So it comes down to the conscious choice for me. And it's like Socrates said, every citizen has a duty to see their body in top shape before they die. And I think that rings true. I feel like I have a duty to be beautiful while I can. I mean, that being said, I have a love of lifting really heavy objects in the gym, but that's just me. And if that's not your thing, fine. But the idea that women are angry that you don't see more big girls with ripped, chiseled dudes is kind of crazy, because you can't argue that someone should love you for your mind and then simultaneously argue that you want to see more ripped dudes with bigger girls and you think it's a cultural issue that there isn't, when in reality, a really ripped guy is going to be more inclined to be in a relationship with a girl who shares his dietary and hobby habits. You know, I'm more likely to be with a girl who enjoys going to the gym 5 days a week, because that's what I do. I'm more likely to be with a girl who's okay with eating grilled chicken 5 days a week instead of a girl that wants to have pizza 5 days a week. And that's just because it meshes with my life better. And so I think that's all something we need to kind of look at and be aware of when it comes to this whole fat argument. You know, people are going to love you for who you are, and a lot of times that has to do with your workout habits. We'll have more when we come back.
A progressive woman once told me that if she was my wife, she'd poison my coffee. I told her if I was her husband, I'd drink it. This is Alan Bordius, host of Their Finest Hour, Monday nights here on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Now, I just want to clear something up here. I don't want to be misunderstood. I am not saying people should not have self-esteem if they are overweight. If you choose to be overweight and you choose to love your body, that's great. More power to you. I hope you find somebody that loves it too. But if you're one of these people that hates being fat and don't like being overweight, and so you have an issue when somebody mentions your weight problem, or, you know, your weight, then you can't really get mad about it, because you've made that choice on what to do with your body. You made the choice to be sedentary. You made the choice to eat a high-calorie diet that led to you being overweight. That's your life. Fine, embrace it, but you can't really get mad when people criticize you for that choice. I mean, I wouldn't get mad if people criticize me for wearing, you know, the clothes I wear. It's just a choice I make every day when I get up. And it's the same thing when it comes to your physique. You make the choice not to go to the gym every day. You make the choice not to eat a caloric deficit so you can lose weight. That's just the way of the world. I'll give you a personal example. I wear a hoodie a lot to work. And I know a lot of people say that's unprofessional, but that's the business I'm in. It's perfectly fine to be more casual in the office. And I had somebody ask me about it at work the other day. They asked me, you know, why am I always wearing a hoodie? And so I unzipped my hoodie, took it off, and they saw I wasn't wearing sleeves. And so it became obvious that I was wearing gym clothes under my work clothes. I was wearing a shirt that looked good, but just had no sleeves. And that's because I usually don't want to carry, you know, two sets of clothes around with me. I try to combine them as much as I can so I don't have to have all this extra stuff with me all the time when I go to work and then I go to the gym afterwards. You know, I keep gym shorts in my bag, and that's it. You know, I just change into the shorts and go. So, you know, somebody criticized me about my hoodie, and I just laughed, and I showed them why. And then it became clear that it was a utility thing, not me being lazy. So, I mean, you could argue I'm lazy for not wanting to wear a collared shirt and carry extra clothes with me, which I've been known to do. I'll put a collared shirt on over, you know, the workout clothes with the hoodie or whatever, or not with the hoodie and just wear the collared shirt. But I think, you know, the idea that it's a superficial opinion is important, and that we understand that it is an opinion. Anything superficial like that, anything subjective, it's an opinion, and arguing with somebody on something that is an opinion is not an argument. It's just an act of futility. Everybody's got an opinion on something, whether or not they should, and trying to argue against it, there's no argument rationally to be made. It's an opinion. It's not 2 + 2 is 4. It's red is better than blue. You can't argue red is better than blue. You can't argue blue is better than red. It's an opinion. All right, let's move on to something a little bit more hard-hitting. ABC News has reported that the NSA, former CIA and National Security Agency Director Michael Hayden admitted at a Johns Hopkins Foreign Affairs Symposium that the NSA does make decisions on killing people based on metadata. Now, a lot of the people that don't seem concerned with the NSA spying domestically make the argument that, oh, it's just metadata. It doesn't have the content of your phone calls. It's not important. It's just numbers and code and nothing important, and you have nothing to hide if you've done nothing wrong, etc. infinitum. Now, it's important to note that any argument that the metadata is not important is completely gone by this admission that we kill people based on metadata. He said, we kill people based on metadata, but that's not what we do with this metadata, referring to the domestic spying program. Now, he goes on to say stuff like, oh, well, you gotta have this discussion based on what the program does and not what it potentially could do. And here is where we come to the crux. They are using this data to find and kill terrorists. And they're using this data to make decisions based on whether or not they kill or attack someone. The idea that they have the same data on American citizens is absolutely crazy. I mean, if they're using this data to track down and kill terrorists, then there is absolutely no reason why we should think it's okay for the American government to have that data on American citizens. They admitted that they use this data to determine who they kill at the NSA. So all this argument about, in the government's interest, and it's in national security interest to keep it, and it's inconsequential, is out the window. They admitted they use it to kill people. And I have to say that it is disgusting to me. It is abhorrent. And it's just one of the many reasons why I'm a libertarian. Because I don't trust the government to have this data. I don't trust them to have it or use it responsibly or not use it or keep it in a quote-unquote lockbox like they say, because they are in fact using it to kill people. They openly admitted to it. So for all of you people that are still trying to argue that the NSA spying is not a big deal domestically, that argument's done. It's officially gone. It's lost. It's a dead argument now. You can't argue that the NSA data, the metadata, is harmless and not a violation of privacy when we know for a fact that they can use it to determine who they're going to kill. It's done. And I hope that this will make national news, but I doubt it. And I hope it will, because when they make this admission, it proves the libertarian point, which is probably why it won't make it, and because most people are kind of think it's a done issue, and they think it's more about Snowden's comments, or is Snowden a traitor, and is Bradley Manning a traitor? And you can have debates on Bradley Manning. I would argue that you cannot have those debates with Snowden because he tried to go to his superiors multiple times. He tried to contact the authorities and nothing was done about it, so he released it to the press. But now we're seeing that they do use this data to determine who they're going to kill. Now, he claims that they can't use it to build your entire social network, but that is exactly what they do to determine who the terrorists are. They link them up to this extremist and that extremist, and they try and get people to have probable cause of being terrorists. Now, we're getting into a day and age where Tea Party patriots are being called extremists and terrorists, and you've got, fundamentalist Christian groups being labeled as terrorists despite having no proof of that whatsoever. And you've got, the State Department fighting against Boko Haram being labeled as a terror group. And you've got this agency that claims to use the data to connect terrorists and to kill terrorists. Well, that should be even more frightening in an age where small government folks are being labeled wrongly as terrorists. I mean, God forbid we get somebody in the NSA that thinks the Southern Poverty Law Center's classification of hate groups is a pass to call someone a terrorist. And since these judges, these courts, the secret courts that make the decisions on what's fair play is completely hidden, and there's no advocation for the other side whatsoever. There's no legal defense, no due process. There's no due process of law in these courts. So when you're looking at this, and you look at the government's record of prosecuting innocent people, when you look at police rates of killing innocent people, you can't help but not trust the government to do this. I mean, look at how many dogs have been killed by police in raids. Look at how many people have been killed by Obama innocents in drone strikes. You can't look at all of the data that the government has killed innocent people, has put innocent people on death row, has put innocent people in jail, and say that they know how to use this data responsibly. They've already shown they can't use our money responsibly, let alone have our lives in their hands at the mercy of some bureaucrat and just hope his pen doesn't slip or hope there's not a misunderstanding of any way. It's terrifying. It's terrifying to think that you could be on a watch list for saying key phrases. Heaven forbid you accidentally call a wrong number and it turns out to be somebody they're watching. I mean, that kind of thing can happen. And it could lead to your metadata being used to make you a target on a kill list. I mean, a lot of people will say that that's jumping to conclusions, but it only takes one person screwing up in government, and God knows how many people do that on a regular basis, to make this nightmare a reality, to make this problem come to bear. And the idea that the government has the potential to do it is just another indication of how far we've fallen in terms of the freedoms we allow people. Our Constitution says that we have a natural-born right to be secure in our persons and papers from unreasonable searches and seizures. This metadata is seized from everybody. Now, I would say that if the police just ask to see my phone and I say no and they take it anyway and they just look at my phone, I mean, there's nothing on there for them to find. But the fact that they could do it and it would be argued that I don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy for what's on my phone is crazy, because that's what it amounts to. It's just one step away from a search of my cell phone or my computer. Now, you folks know me, and I'm no radical. Not that the word radical has any meaning, because I can be considered radical from Democrats. I could be considered radical from people who don't care about politics. I am considered radical compared to fat people because I like to work out and eat healthy. I can be considered radical from cat lovers because I love dogs and not so much cats. Except that one cat that defended that kid that's in national news. But this is a radio program, so what good does it do me to talk about a video? But I think it's important that we remember government is a necessary evil. At least that was its intention. And it is our job as citizens to not allow the government to get out of hand, to not allow the government to take our freedoms like this, to not give the government free reign over our lives under any sort of whim, or give them any way that they could absolutely destroy lives. And we do that in way too many facets of our lives. And you can look at the different agencies that have militarized in the government that arguably shouldn't even exist under the Constitution, like the Department of Homeland Security. Because, quite frankly, we shouldn't need that department when we have a military and a police force. And you can even look at the militarization of our police force. I mean, police getting tanks and stuff to serve warrants is ridiculous. I mean, this is the sort of thing where you want to leave the tanks with the military, and the cops can request it if there is an armed terror cell in their town. You know, it's not something that we want to see in our country, but it's something we've allowed to happen. And it's our fault. We get the government we deserve. And it's horrible that we deserve this one, but that's the way it goes for a democracy. Because there's so many of us that don't care. There are so many of us that aren't paying attention and care more about Kim Kardashian's abs or butt than we do about politics. There are more people talking about Beyonce's sister attacking Jay-Z than there are about foreign policy or the economy. And a lot of people who are talking about those issues don't know what they're talking about. And so it's a major concern when the government has this kind of power and there's nobody stepping up to tell them, back off. We'll have more when we come back.
Hi, this is Missy Bordius. Join me as I share my womanly bits on the Conservative Feminist Show, 11 p.m. on Fridays, here on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
Alright, so we've got a couple things we're going to touch on in this last segment here. We're going to try and run through them. The first is Bradley, a.k.a. Chelsea Manning. Now, a lot of people on the right, and I'm sure that includes some of you, think that it's ridiculous for people to change their gender, for people to have what's called gender dysphoria, for people who think, you know, they're a woman living in a man's body or a man living in a woman's body. And I can understand how some people think that it's not so much an opinion, but it's a non-disease, and that's because they've been bombarded with, you know, flamboyantly gay and effeminate gay men, and they think, well, you know, these people do just fine. Or you've got, you know, gay men who do drag, and that's, you know, supposedly enough. But, you know, here's the thing. If you don't want the government interfering in your life, you've got to take into account people with this mental dysfunction. And it is a legitimate disease. It's been defined that way by doctors. And whether you think that's a liberal bias or something is neither here nor there, because, quite frankly, you're not a doctor or a psychologist. And I know a lot of you probably think that's abrasive, but it is what it is. But let me appeal to your greater senses. The idea that Bradley Manning should stay Bradley and not be Chelsea is wrong for a few reasons. One, she has severe anxiety and depression, and they're worried about suicidal tendencies, and there would be therapy involved for all of this, and all of these antidepressants and therapy would be on the taxpayer dime. So when it comes to Bradley Manning, a.k.a. Chelsea Manning, either way, since we decided, or the Army decided, to put her in prison for 35 years, you have basically said that this person will not be able to do anything outside of prison. Their freedom is gone. And when you make that decision, you also consequently take up the burden of paying for their health expenses. Now, hear me out. That means you would have to pay for the health expenses associated with the therapy, the antidepressants, antipsychotics if it gets to that point, suicide watch, and then there would also be possible rapings and beatings in an all-male prison that would be associated with that as well. So, if Chelsea Manning, who did legally change her name, was forced to remain a man, there would be large medical expenses associated with that, all on the taxpayer dime, because it violates the 8th Amendment to withhold any sort of treatment, including psychological treatment, while they're in prison, because, again, you've taken their freedom, which consequently runs a medical cost as well. You cannot torture them in prison, and psychological torture is a very real thing. And when you compare the costs of estrogen treatment with the costs of psychiatric treatment, antidepressants, suicide watch, protective custody, all of that, it is cheaper. Hear that again. It is cheaper to just pay for the gender swap than it is to force her to stay as a man. Now, whatever your opinions on it being gross or wrong or sinful, you're allowed to hold those opinions. But the problem is when you decide to put someone in jail, you have to keep them healthy while they're in prison. You can't just let them get sick and die. And that includes suicide, and that includes letting them go crazy. So let's just cool the jets on that one, pump the brakes, and just realize it's cheaper to give the kid estrogen than it is to let them go crazy because they think they're a woman in a man's body. If they think that, so what? Give them the estrogen, let them do their thing, let them be weird. It doesn't matter. You know, it's not your body, and it's cheaper to treat it this way than the other way. So, from a purely fiscal standpoint, it stands to reason to just give the estrogen. From an ethical standpoint, it's none of your business. It's none of my business. I hate that it's even a headline. I hate that we even talk about it. Because this whole discussion on gender identity is something that a lot of people don't understand. And it is tantamount to some of the most severe psychological disorders when it isn't treated properly, which in this case would be letting the gender swap happen. Now, I'm more than happy to debate that further on my page if somebody wants to bring that up, or engage me on Twitter. We can have that conversation. Otherwise, let's just leave it at that. There's other things in the news that I feel are more important. Namely, Karl Rove making claims that Hillary Clinton could have brain damage. Now, a lot of people on the left and a lot of people in the media have come out crying foul, saying that Karl Rove is just being mean-spirited and is just doing this to attack the Democrat candidate and is trying to go ahead and gear up into presidential mode because that's what he does professionally. So, let's be real. He has a legitimate concern. Presidents have been asked about their health before they come into office. Chris Christie has been criticized for his weight. Reagan was criticized for his age. And that's just the way it is in politics. When somebody's going to govern the country, their health is fair play. Now, arguably, Karl Rove's comments were taken out of context, which they were. Karl Rove was asking about her mental health, if she did receive brain damage. And that's understandable because with the brain damage, you have her medical issues that came up while she was Secretary of State. She had a aneurysm and didn't come to work for a month after she was released from the hospital. She was hospitalized, I believe, for 4 days. Now, her doctor has said that the aneurysm was behind the ear and not in the brain. So it was able to be treated. And she also suffered a concussion from a fall. So from a medical doctor perspective, I am no medical doctor, but it is a valid question to ask about her mental health when she's had 2 serious brain-related issues in the last 5 years. Now, I would argue that his remarks about, her glasses are made for kids with brain damage, he put his foot in his mouth. He's ignorant. And I'm not a fan of Karl Rove, but he's being crucified on this. It's completely ridiculous. He is perfectly within reason to ask about her mental health and request, the doctor's comments on it, because she had the concussion and the aneurysm and was off of her post for a month. It's a perfectly valid question. So a lot of these people that are coming out and crying foul and saying it's a low blow and all that stuff, not so. Not so. It's perfectly reasonable. The president's health is a concern, and she very well probably will be the Democrat nominee. So to say that she's not, that her health is a low blow is not acceptable. It's not something that we can accept as Americans. We have the right to ask it, period. And you've got other things coming out from the Clinton camp, such as, Bill Clinton kind of addressed it today, and he defended Hillary with Benghazi, saying she impaneled a very high-level review committee with the immediate past chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Basically, she had a phone call. She called some folks. And that was it. I mean, I kind of feel like he's just paying homage to her possible presidential run more than anything, because when you look at the security requests and when you look at the talking points that came out of the White House, the whole thing is fishy. I mean, when you look at this whole issue, it is very concerning to see what looks like an apparent political cover-up by the White House in a presidential election to try and keep voters from getting the issue addressed. And I think, and I said this during the election, I think Romney did a poor job of addressing it during the election, which he should have gone after strongly. Because quite frankly, the idea that we don't know where the president was, the idea that we don't have, tapes of the meeting in the Situation Room, the fact that there's been, statements from officials in the White House who said the president was not in the Situation Room when it happened, the speculation that he was sleeping to get ready for a fundraiser rather than dealing with this, not acceptable. President of the United States has a hard job. And that job involves getting your butt out of bed and dealing with situations like this in real time. If you're going to be involved in the rest of the world, that involves getting up when stuff's going down in the other parts of the world. And I think that as Americans, we have a lot of questions to get answered. And that's why I'm really glad Trey Gowdy from South Carolina is heading up this special committee, because I think that he'll get to the bottom of it. And I hate that Democrats are trying to make this a political issue. I think that Republicans have waited so long that it is indicative of them trying to keep it in the news as a political issue, but that doesn't convolute the importance of it. I don't think that takes away from the fact that 4 Americans lost their lives and nobody did anything about it. The leader at AFRICOM was relieved of duty when he said screw it, was going to go try and help anyway. And the idea that, people in the military were told to stand down and that order never came, and yes it did, and this, that, and the other, and the talking points came from the CIA, but wait, no it didn't. And now we're seeing that there is a lot of corruption in this administration and in the legislature. You've got, emails surfacing saying that Democrats in the Senate worked with the IRS to prosecute Tea Party groups. And it just goes to show you, and it's not just the Democrats that do this. The Republicans are guilty too. When they took office, they were the ones that passed the Patriot Act. They expanded entitlements. They did none of the things that Republicans are supposed to want to do. For instance, like trying to get a flat tax passed, trying to reform a lot of these, entitlements so that they become solvent, or get rid of them altogether, or abolish the minimum wage, or anything like that. And now we're starting to see Republicans come out in favor of raising the minimum wage, trying to become more moderate, and it's craziness. It's not something that I find to be acceptable, and I don't think it's something that you guys should too, as an informed voting populace. It is something that we should be raising concerns about. You should always be wary of government. You should always be wary of government doing what it can to hide stuff. You should always be asking questions. Never trust the government. The government has proven that they cannot be trusted. It's not even up for debate at this point. When you look at the Reagan administration, and especially when you look at the past Clinton administration, when you look at all of the things that have been done, even the Reagan administration with the Contra programs, you cannot just dismiss issues, based on party, what have you. It doesn't matter. Every person in office should be suspect because of the power they wield. So I hope that if we do get a Republican in the next election, that you'll join me in being suspect of them too, because they're not going to check themselves. We've got to check them. And I don't trust the Democrats to keep Republicans in check. All right, that's our show for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. I am Dustin Hoyt. This is America Our Way on Vigilant Liberty Radio, and we'll see you next time.